So you work at Regav, right? That's the name of the
Regavim.
organization.
Correct. I've been with
Okay.
Regavim for about 7 years full time. Before
What is
that, I
Regavim?
freelance work for them. So Regavim is a fascinating organization. It's really unique because it combines several things. It's a fieldwork and research based policy. I would say it's a think tank, but it's a lot more. We are an activist organization, very small and extremely focused on protecting, on impacting Israel's land use policy. It starts like this. What's the most basic resource a country has? The land. Without land, you don't have a country. And we began to understand, the people who founded Regavim began to understand that there was a very serious problem in Israel's land use policy. It was Zionism was sort of seeping out of the public space and was no longer really the moving force behind Israel's land use policy. So they began to see that this problem was manifesting itself in different ways in different areas of the country. And so they began to research it and to actually try to impact it, working on the legislative and legal levels. That means what we do on a regular basis is we identify, let's say, an exemplar case that that expresses the problem, and we take that case all the way through the bureaucratic process. First, we build a file by examining it on the ground, boots on the ground, field workers who are out in the field every day all across the country, looking at who's using the land resources, with what permission, and with what results. We build a file. We investigate the legal aspects of this land use issue. When we notice that something is part of a larger pattern and is having a larger impact than an individual case of misuse of that resource, we will take it through the whole bureaucratic process, meaning file an official complaint, discuss it with whoever's in charge in that particular area. When that doesn't work, we end up suing the government of Israel or whatever authorities are responsible for enforcing the law and allowing this hole to be filled with illegality. So
So
we
tell
generally,
me, yeah, I think it would help if you brought me to the real world on this stuff, because you speak in generalities about like land use and policies,
yes.
and so just tell me what it means day to day. What kind of stuff do you guys come
So
across?
we come across massive illegal construction. We come across massive failures of law enforcement, and we've come across even more amazingly huge holes in Israel's legislation in terms of planning and construction codes. And these holes were caused by a combination of historical. It's really a confluence of historical evolution. So, for
Okay.
example, Israel's planning and construction code had essentially no sanctions, meaning if somebody took a piece of land that didn't belong to them, piece of public property that was supposed to be a park or whatever, built themselves a 6 apartment structure, started renting out the property,
Mm-hmm.
and raking in the funds. Now, the land doesn't belong to them. They have no land building permit. They have no official connections to electricity, so they tap into the grid. They have no garbage removal, and they have no sewage, and they have none of the things that you get when you get a building permit and you develop a piece of land properly. And essentially, you have ill-gotten gains that are going on and on and on. We noticed that this was happening with massive impact on Israel's ability to plan for the future, to use these land resources for future generations, to solve housing crises, etc. And we found concentrations of areas where this was particularly prevalent, but the law itself had no sanctions, meaning the fines for taking a piece of public property and building on it were still being expressed in mandatory Palestine sums of money. So it was comical. So essentially, crime paid, and people were making a killing, and the government of Israel was unable to do several things. It was unable to plan for the future, to use its land resources wisely and preserve the land resource and open spaces. It was also incapable of providing services to people who were living in illegal structures.
Oh
There
wow.
was no way to
So
create roads. There was no way to lay electrical lines. There was no way to improve communications lines because people were building willy-nilly all over the place. And the law had no ability to essentially make it so that it didn't pay for people to do this sort of construction crime. So we
so
worked for over the
could
course of years
could I
with.
actually just put a
Mhm,
pause in that, because you opened just a salad of issues there that
yeah,
I have a million questions. So it
mhm,
sounds like if I could just regurgitate what you said back, just so I make sure I understood it. So
mhm.
because, and I'm going to assume that the land in question that you're talking about is the land that Israel conquered in the 67 war, right? But no, okay, so not even.
No,
So
I'm talking
what?
about inside 1948 Israel. The law had never been updated.
Oh
The
wow.
way that Israel's legal system has evolved in different parts of the country and in different areas of law is extremely strange
Okay.
because we adopted some British mandate law, we adopted some Turkish law, Ottoman law, we adopted all sorts of other kinds of systems of law, and we created a new legal system, patchwork kind of thing. Inside Little Israel, 1948 Israel, the
Mm-hmm.
law that would regulate construction and planning and that the use of that land resource had never been updated. So it was so out of date that it was essentially asking people to break the law because there were no sanctions.
Right, and people
We
need
worked,
places to live, right? So,
no, people wanted to make money. They wanted to make a quick
hmm,
buck. So
hmm.
that's really what it was. It's
And
much easier.
can you explain that? What is this money making scheme that people were up to? I mean,
Build an apartment building,
mm-hmm.
pay, a $5 fine for building an illegal structure, and charge people $5,000 a month rent on, build this thing on land that you don't own. Don't pay taxes on it because it's not registered. Don't pay, don't develop any of the infrastructure necessary because it's not registered. Clean
Oh
profits
wow.
straight into your pocket. And
So
the
who
fines
owns? Hmm.
were $5.
So there are sanctions, but they're pathetic,
They
essentially.
were pathetic. So we worked
Okay.
for years to
Hmm.
highlight this problem.
Mm-hmm.
And we worked for years to show that the communities themselves, where illegal construction was most prevalent, were the communities that were most backward because the government could not develop infrastructure under and around and to serve things that were unplanned and were simply built illegally.
Okay.
It took us years to get this message across. We did it by constantly nagging, highlighting this in the press, and taking the government itself to court for failure to legislate and to properly deal with this massive scourge. And I'm talking about tens of thousands of illegal structures that were strangling development. So we worked afterwards for several years with a deputy attorney general by the name of Erez Kamenetz, and an amendment to Israel's Planning and Construction Code was finally drafted on the basis of our recommendations and was eventually ratified in court. That is known as the Kamenetz Law, but it is officially a collection of amendments called Amendment 116 to the Planning and Construction Code of the State of Israel. So
So and that rationalizes the law for the entire country, both
it
in the
makes
48 borders.
crime not pay. It gives local authorities the ability to act against offenders. It cut down through all the bureaucracy of having to go to court to sue someone who had built illegally. Instead, you could have administrative uh, steps by the municipality that could nip it in the bud before it went on, and you didn't have court proceedings dragging on for decades at a time, making it essentially ridiculous, because after a building is standing for 20 years and there's finally a judgment against it, no one's going to knock it down and leave all the people living in it homeless. So it created a whole set of administrative tools and powers of enforcement in local government that did not exist in Israel before. In the
Okay.
first year that this amendment came into effect, illegal construction, first year and a half, illegal construction nationwide was cut by over 70%. People
Whoa.
understood for the first time that it didn't pay, that they were going to pay a high price for building illegally. So they stopped. Strangely enough, the communities that were hardest hit by all of the illegal construction, the communities where it was most prevalent, were also the communities who sent members of Knesset to repeal the law that was meant to make sense out of all of this. And let's just call it what it is. The Arab communities within Israel are the places where illegal construction is most rampant, for a variety of reasons. Most of the land in these communities is privately owned, so people were building without permits on land that belonged to them, but it made it impossible for any planning regime or any infrastructure development to actually happen. So, strangely enough, the Arab parties in Knesset have tried, since the passage of the Kamenetz Amendment, to repeal it.
And do you know that is there money behind those efforts? So the people who are profiting off the old regime, are they funding these attempts
They're the
to
ones
repeal the
electing
law?
them. Sure.
I don't know. My question is: are the property developers who made a killing before in the old regime, are
Yes.
they the ones? Are they the ones who are funding these campaigns?
They're the movers and shakers in those communities. They rally the votes, and they rally voting blocks, and they wield a
Mm-hmm.
lot of power. I can tell you that we actually went to court against a member of Knesset whose parliamentary branch office in his home community was in an illegal building. And the Knesset pays for this, right? Like in every country, a member of Congress in the United States also has a field office in their constituency, and the government pays for those offices so that they can have contact with their constituents. Same is true in Israel. So the Knesset of Israel, the Israeli government, was essentially paying rent in an illegal structure against which there had been demolition orders issued, and this member of Knesset was conducting his government business in the legal structure. So we used this as an illustrative case, which we took to court in order to show how absolutely ridiculous the whole thing was. So
And
we made it to
is the political campaign to repeal these laws, is that cloaked in claims of racism against Arabs and
of
oppression of
course.
the Palestinians? Yeah.
Of course.
Wow.
That was the main claim when it was passed, that this is a racist law. Of course it is not. It applies to everyone equally. The communities that are impacted by it most are the communities where there's the most illegal construction.
And
So
what does that mean exactly? What is the negative impact that you said that hurts these Arab communities the most? Why does that hurt them so much?
people don't like to pay taxes. I don't know what it's like where you live. People don't like to pay taxes. They don't like to apply for permits. They don't like to have to pay for things like development and infrastructure and garbage collection. They want a free ride. They enjoyed a
Okay.
free ride for a very long time.
But they get very bad services from the state if they don't pay
They
for it,
get no
essentially.
services from the state. So it's a double-edged sword. They claim on the one hand that their services are terrible because Israel's racist. And on the other hand, when the state of Israel tries to enforce the law in order to create some sense out of all of this mess, they claim that that's racist. If you want parks and you want high-speed internet and you want proper sewage and you want public transportation and you want new roads and you want roads paved in your community, you have to pay your taxes. That
Right.
means property assessment. And that means you have to apply for a permit, and there has to be an engineering report before you build a building saying whether or not it's possible to provide infrastructure and services to that structure, and how many units can go on a particular plot of land, even if it's privately owned property. You can't just build because you own a piece of land. You can't do whatever you want on it. That's the way civilized countries work. So now that's how the state of Israel works as well, thanks to the Kamenetz Amendment. However,
Yeah.
that's inside 1948 Israel. And your
Okay.
question about 1967 Israel, Judea and Samaria, is a whole nother can of worms. Because I'm not sure how much you're aware of this, but in 1967, when Israel liberated those territories from the hostile Arab regimes that had invaded and illegally occupied them, that's Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank, the state of Israel refrained from reestablishing Israeli law in these territories. So all of the building and construction codes, all of these things, even the Amendment 116, the Kamenetz law, don't apply in Judea and Samaria.
Okay.
The law that applies in Judea and Samaria is even more ridiculous. The law that applies in Judea and Samaria, because the state of Israel wanted to leave room to achieve a negotiated resolution for the people living in these territories and to come to a peaceful resolution of the conflict, starting in 1960, even before, they said, you know what, we will treat the territory in some aspects as if it's not sovereign Israeli territory. We will treat it as if we are an occupier for certain aspects of the law until we can negotiate a resolution. And then everyone will know whose land is whose, what's what, and then we'll apply Israeli law to the places that eventually are recognized internationally as Israel, and that will be that. So according to the Geneva Conventions, if a country occupies territory, it has the obligation to uphold the system of law of the previous recognized sovereign. Okay, so who was the previous recognized sovereign internationally under international law in Judea and Samaria?
I'm assuming that isn't Jordan.
No, Jordan was condemned internationally as an aggressor and an occupier, an illegal occupier. And so Jordan was not the sovereign under international law.
What is it, the
and
UK?
So who came before Jordan? The British Mandate, which was also not a sovereign. It was a caretaker, right? So who was the previous sovereign over the quote-unquote the West Bank, Judea and Samaria and Gaza?
The Ottoman Empire, which doesn't exist.
Exactly. The Ottoman Empire, which ceased to exist. The Ottoman Empire itself, believe it or not, realized before World War I that the system of law it was using in these territories was inefficient, actually counterproductive, and encouraged land theft and conflict. And they tried at the time to revamp the system of law, but then the First World War broke out and they didn't have a chance to finish the job. So we are stuck in Judea and Samaria with a system of law that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world and was abandoned by the people who thought it up over 100 years ago.
Oh my God.
And that is what Israeli courts are upholding in Judea and Samaria. Now,
And
those laws...
Is there a way to update that? For example, there's been a few technological advancements. I don't think the Ottomans had to contend with, let's say, Wi-Fi issues or something like that. Is there a way to update the law?
Many ways to update it. There are many better systems. Any system would be better. But the state of Israel has refrained from making any changes because it would be accused of behaving as if it were a sovereign. And Israel's afraid of the international uproar that would be caused by any change in the legal system. So it continues to meticulously uphold the laws passed by the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire hundreds of years ago. This is an open invitation to anarchy, to land theft, to constant conflict. Here's one example. Under Ottoman land law, if you take a piece of land, now think back, this entire region of the world, the region from which I am speaking to you, all of what was at the time Greater Syria, was one giant wasteland. There was almost no population. It was desolate and therefore was not productive for the Sultan. The whole point of the empire was to collect taxes. So you can only collect taxes if people are making productive use of the land resource. So the Ottoman Empire passed a law saying that if you use a piece of land, even if it doesn't belong to you, it's public land, it belongs to the Sultan, it's eminent domain, whatever you want to call it, take a piece of land and you use it for agricultural purposes for a period of time, and no one objects, you will get certain rights to that property, and it can no longer be considered the Sultan's land, public land, for all intents and purposes, right? If you stop using it, it reverts to public property, meaning the Sultan's property. But for as long as they're using it, you get rights to it, and no one, and you pay your taxes, and you have usage rights to that piece of land. And there were all sorts of Turkish words that describe those intermediate types of rights to a piece of land. That land is that law is currently upheld by the Supreme Court of the State of Israel for the benefit of Arabs only, not for Jews. So if an Arab comes and takes a piece of Israeli state land that is registered to the state of Israel in Judea and Samaria, plants stuff on it, the Supreme Court of the State of Israel will recognize those rights, and that land will then be registered to the Palestinian Authority. That could be in my backyard too, if I don't object. It could be anywhere. But if I do the exact same thing, the Supreme Court of the State of Israel says, no, Ottoman land law was never intended to benefit Jews because there were no Jews here. The area had been ethnically cleansed. So only Arabs can benefit from that law.
Wow.
The Palestinian Authority has used this loophole in the outmoded and racist and clearly retrograde Ottoman land law system to remove hundreds of thousands of dunams of land from Israeli state possession.
Oh my God.
Yes.
So no wonder there's chaos, right? I mean,
There's
everyone
chaos.
everyone that
Correct.
lives there is playing a game in their minds that's
Correct.
been out of fashion for more than 100 years.
Correct. Now, in addition to that, there's also actual construction. That's the agricultural thing that we just talked about. But
Okay.
there's also illegal construction. And Regavim, being the experts in illegal construction, we research and document all the illegal construction that goes on this side of the Green Line as well, meaning in the
Illegal
area
as it pertains to the old Ottoman law
as
that's
it pertains to any law. If Israel
okay.
is has jurisdiction in Area C, since the Oslo Accords divided up the territory, Area C is what remains in Israeli hands. Anything that happens in Area C of Judea and Samaria must be approved by the authorities in charge, whether you consider them the occupying power or the sovereign or whatever, according to international law. According to the Geneva Conventions that predated all of us, an occupier, even an occupier, is the solely responsible for the use of land resources in an occupied territory, right? So that would be the state of Israel in all of Area C has to issue building permits that would require Israel to survey the land, figure out who owns it, figure out what the resources are there, figure out what that piece of land can sustain, etc. All the things that go into getting a building permit.
Okay.
Anything that is built without a building permit from the state of Israel in Area C is illegal. So our field coordinator goes out every day and says, okay, who's building? I see building happening here. Who's building it? What's the legal status of this piece of land? Who's using it? With what permission? Then we map all of that illegal construction out on a big map. And then we take a step back and we connect the dots and we say, okay, what picture emerges? Is there a pattern here? Is there a policy? Is there something that the bigger picture should be telling us that nobody's paying attention to.
Okay.
So the small picture is bad enough. At this point, there are over 90,000 illegal structures in Area C, illegal Arab structures in Area C of Judea and Samaria. It's a very small area, by the way.
Area C? Sorry,
There,
just refresh my memory, but also anyone listening. So there's areas A, B, and C. A is a very small portion of the West Bank, Judea and Samaria that's controlled by the Palestinian Authority, right?
hold on. It goes like
Oh,
this.
tell me.
The Oslo Accords in 1993, 1995 looked at the territory and said, okay, let's try to make some sort of autonomous area for Palestinian self-rule. How do we do this? Let's look at what's actually happening on the ground, right? There are areas that are large urban, Arab urban concentrations, the big cities that you've heard of in Judea in the West Bank, right? There's Nablus, there's Bethlehem, there's Jericho, there's cities, they're big cities, there's thousands and thousands of people living there. That's Area A, the Arab urban population centers. Then there are
And the
other
Palestinian Authority that's under their governance.
Correct. The Palestinian Authority was created in order to administer Area A and Area B. Area B is a little more sparsely populated. They are the rural communities, Arab communities in Judea and Samaria, villages, for all intents and purposes, villages and their satellite villages.
And how much
so that's
is
Area A and Area B.
And how much is Area A and B? It's about.
So when Oslo was originally drawn up, areas A and B together constituted about 40% of the West Bank. And Area C, the part under Israeli jurisdiction, was 60%.
Okay.
Between all the illegal Arab agricultural work that's taking advantage of this loophole and all of the illegal construction, the 60-40 has now reversed itself completely. The Palestinian Authority is now in control of 60%, and Israel is still, nominally at least, in control of 40%.
What does that mean in practice? That Palestinian Authority security services are patrolling this area? What does that mean?
It means that it is being used, administered, and overseen and developed by the Palestinian Authority, and Jews can't go there.
Cannot go there.
Cannot go there on fear of death. Okay.
Oh, wow.
So there's also other things that it means, because here's the real problem, and this is where Regavim comes in. Aside from mapping out the sheer massive quantity of this de facto annexation, we actually took the step back, looked at the map of where all this construction and agricultural work is happening, and we realized the bigger problem isn't the quantity, it's the quality. Because all of the areas where there are concentrations of illegal Arab construction or agricultural work that have essentially annexed territory are strategically placed. They're placed in areas that create contiguous Palestinian statehood de facto. They endanger, engulf, and completely cut off Jewish communities from one another and from the rest of Israel. Meaning interrupt.
If I could just put on my leftist hat for a second.
Sure.
This is the allegation that has been leveled at Israel for decades now, that the Israelis they strategically place their settlements at the West Bank such that they make an contiguous Palestinian state impossible, and that they cut off those enclaves from the rest of the, say, greater Palestine or the future Palestinian state.
Okay, so let's go back to the logic behind the Oslo Division to begin with. The whole point of the Oslo Division was to prevent contiguity so that Israel could maintain its security. That's why areas A and B weren't connected to one another. And Israel maintained, under international law, security control in the periphery of these isolated bubbles within the territory. Because otherwise, Israel would be completely incapable of maintaining security. Right? So that was the whole concept behind Oslo to begin with. Right? Now, I would also remind you that Nowhere in the Oslo Accords does it say anything about a requirement for creating a Palestinian state. It's one possible outcome of a negotiated resolution, but it's not the only one, and it's not the only one. It never was the only one. It's not necessarily the best one.
But that was the whole point, right?
No.
Hmm.
The point was to improve the lives and allow for self-rule of some sort. Now,
Hmm.
look at the world today. I'm not talking
Okay.
about some fantasy thing.
Mm-hmm.
How many places in the world are there places that have autonomous rule that aren't states? Many,
Really?
many. All over Europe, right? Switzerland has cantons, and the United States has states, and there are all sorts of places where there is local government, but there's no army, there's no ability to conduct independent foreign relations. Think about what would happen if tomorrow there were a state of Palestine here in Judea and Samaria,
Mm-hmm.
and they signed an arms treaty with Iraq. And their army were supplied with weapons and ammunition. The state of Israel would cease to exist tomorrow, right? Having an army inside, and look at a map. I don't know how familiar you are with the location of Judea and Samaria, but it is literally the heart of the land of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
This would also completely eradicate the independent state of Jordan, where the first two-state solution was carried out.
Mm.
You know your history?
Mm-hmm.
All of Jordan, Transjordan, was part of the original mandate for the Jewish homeland.
Right.
The British chopped territory in two, not in half, but 80-20,
Mm-hmm.
and 80% was set aside to be the Arab homeland in Palestine. Right? The first two-state solution created Jordan, and that was supposed to solve the conflict forever, because there was now an Arab state of Palestine and a Jewish state of Palestine. Israel, Jordan. How'd that work out? Not so well.
Yeah, we're doing great.
Not so well. A few wars, tens of thousands of people dead, and we're right back where we started, because the 80% wasn't enough. They wanted 100%. And then they took, out of the 20% that was remaining, they took Judea and Samaria, another 20%. That wasn't
Yeah.
enough. They attacked again and tried to eradicate all the rest of it again. And we keep moving, those pieces keep getting smaller and smaller, and this problem is not solved. There is no, well, let's move back to Oslo, right? So the state of Israel said, let's try to negotiate a peaceful resolution, a political resolution for the people who are living here and aren't part of the state of Israel. They, many of them moved in when Jordan occupied the territory. There were incentives to do so. The Jordanians worked very, very hard to populate the areas that had been empty in order to create this contiguity. But over 80% of the people living in Jordan consider themselves Palestinian. So what happens if another Palestine on the other side of the Jordan is established? Jordan will essentially be eradicated. So it's not just an interest of the state of Israel. The entire region will be completely destabilized. And it has never been in the interest, really, of any of the non-Soviet aligned countries to create another Palestinian state, another Arab state here, and to eradicate the only democracy in the Middle East, which is us. So people have a very short
question
memory.
in your mind, because I'm very curious about this. I never quite understood the right wing, or perhaps even the Orthodox Jewish perspective on this. That the claim is that the entire land of Israel is for Jewish sovereignty. If I understood correctly.
Is that relevant?
Well, because you said, for example, that a Palestinian state is not the optimal solution. Self autonomy is autonomy is, and you gave some examples like Switzerland and the U.S., which I think don't don't hold water in my mind because they're still part of the same country, and so they still have a say in on the national level of, for example, the army, the taxes. Those laws do apply to them, where I don't exactly see how that would work for the Palestinians in this case. But tell me if I'm looking at it incorrectly.
There are many possibilities for the population living on the other side of the Jordan, on this side of the Jordan River. There's
Hmm.
confederation, there's federation, there's condominium. Relocation for anybody who wants to be living in an Palestinian Arab majority country.
Hmm.
There are many options.
Yeah.
Anyone who wants to stay on this side of the Jordan should have rights of self-rule if they so choose,
Hmm.
but not necessarily look. In order to achieve peace, everyone has to compromise,
Hmm.
right? There's no zero-sum game here.
Hmm.
Zero-sum game means war. It means people are going to continue to die.
Yeah.
That's not the way it should be,
Hmm.
right? So if the historic national rights on this side of the Jordan River always have been, and were recognized by the nations of the world not so long ago as being overwhelmingly in favor of the return of the Jewish people to this place. Non-Jewish people who wish to stay here can live as a protected minority. And the fact is that 20% of Israel's population already does that. 20% of Israel's population are an Arab minority with full civil rights, but no national rights. There's a big difference between individual rights and national rights. National rights on this side of the Jordan River have always been recognized solely for the Jewish people. If you want to live in a country in which your national rights can be fully expressed, then you have to live in an Arab country, not in a
Yeah.
Jewish country,
Right.
rather than replacing the Jewish country with another Arab country.
And I think that's actually it sounds controversial, but it really isn't, because you wouldn't say that the Mexican people who immigrated to the United States, for example, all of a sudden demanding that no, this is a Mexican country and we should, that would
Right,
sound ridiculous, right? They said no,
right.
you've moved to this. Now the difference is, of course, that they immigrated to an existing country, so slightly
Ah,
different history, but still.
not necessarily. The people who are actually living in this country
Mhm.
when the state of Israel was established were an
Mhm.
extremely small part of the population. When Jordan invaded sovereign Israel in 1948 and occupied and eventually annexed parts of sovereign Israel, it actually moved populations in against international law
Hmm.
for obvious reasons. Um, Out of the original refugee population that left this country when the war broke out, because they were encouraged to do so by the Arabs, by the Arab countries around,
Mhm.
how many people were there?
I think it was 3-1 Arabs to Jews in 48.
No. Well, first of all, 3 to 1 isn't the issue. How many people remain? How many actual refugees are remaining? The Palestinian refugee population in the world today is the
Mhm.
only refugee population that continues to grow exponentially.
Right.
And that is because it is a unique brand of refugeeism that is inherited in perpetuity,
Mhm.
even by people who've never set foot in the Middle East, who were born to parents and grandparents who are citizens of other countries.
Right.
Um, the original refugee population, if UNRWA tomorrow were to disappear and that unique definition of Palestinian refugeeism were to disappear with it, you
Mhm.
would have a number of actual refugees remaining probably under 50,000 people.
I think the daughter of Yasser Arafat, right? She collects refugee money or stipend from. I think so.
Look around.
She's a
people of Palestinian
multi-millionaire.
extraction in the United States are refugees, even though they
Mm,
are third generation Americans with full
mm,
citizenship and rights. There are
mhm,
no other refugees in the world that, if they have citizenship in another country, continue to be considered refugees.
mhm.
And the reason they're considered refugees to this day is in order to replace the state of Israel with this forever growing refugee population.
Right.
Even if they don't want to be here and they have never been here, they are being used as a tool of eradicating the state, to eradicate the state of Israel. But I digress.
No, it's a good digression because it's always been a big question mark in my mind
Hmm.
of how the right wing thinks that this eventually gets solved. Now, it doesn't sound like you've got it totally clear in your mind because I'm sure there's still so many things to
There are
clarify,
many,
but
many options, and I
Mhm.
don't think that the right wing, if I'm speaking for the entire right wing,
Yeah,
I don't even really know what that means. But I don't think anybody wants to impose a final solution on anyone. There are many, many possibilities. But right now, the only possibilities that exist, excuse me one second, sorry. The only possibilities that exist right now are possibilities that are bad because you don't have two sides interested in reaching
yeah,
an agreement.
yeah.
So, when
And I
one
think
side wants the eradication of the other, there's not a whole lot of conversation going on.
correct, which is a point that is so hard for. Yep.
Sorry, sorry. I don't even know where my phone is, but it's ringing. I stopped. Okay.
I said it's such a it's a point that's so hard for most people to get that there is this genuine want and drive to have a peaceful resolution to this conflict. And I think you and I both share it more than most, but it's not going to go anywhere unless, exactly as you said, right, the Palestinians give up this notion of for there to be peace, one side must be destroyed.
I'll tell you something else. My background's in political science.
Mhm,
Uh, it strikes me every day, I think, with a little bit more absurdity, that there's only one conflict in the world that is presented as black, white.
mhm,
Either there's going to be a Palestinian state or there's going to be war. Those are the only options that we're given by the other side.
mhm,
Now, it's childish to say the only possibility is to create another state here. It's never happened in the history of the world that a legally constituted country, a country that had borders recognized by the nations of the world, a country
mhm,
that has been consistently under, I mean, our war of independence is still ongoing. It's been going on for 75 years,
mhm,
at least. Um, and there has been no other country in the world that has given up its sovereign territory time and time and time again to an enemy that refuses to recognize that there can ever be an end to their dispute as long as the state of Israel exists. So the whole conversation is childish.
but let me think about it
It's
from.
forcing us to behave in childish ways because we're putting things in boxes that are just absolutely childish.
So I walked into this conversation already thinking that things were complicated, but when you explained to me the whole legal system, it got only I have a much bigger headache from this. But so thank you for that. But I want to look at it from the point of view of a Palestinian who
Mhm.
has this history of it's a quite a humiliating history, in fact, of constant defeat, families being expelled or fleeing, right, which are both forms of humiliating
Well,
actions.
where is this family? Where is this theoretical Palestinian family? Where are they fleeing? Do you realize that the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria have never moved 1 inch off of the land on which they, their parents, and grandparents have lived,
Well, for
and they're
example,
still
the
considered
families
refugees?
in with the families in Gaza, I think there's quite a few people who are descendants of those who fled from parts of what are now today Israel.
Most of the
Ashkelon.
people living in Gaza are Egyptians, and they are refugees from Egypt. Why are they no longer Egyptians? That you have to ask Egypt. Egypt refuses to take them back.
Still, right? There were, I think the estimates were something like 700,000, 800,000 people that were kicked out or they fled in the 48 war. And so you have that. You have just stay with me for a second. So you have that. You have that in your family history. It's personal, and the Israeli state or even Israelis they embody that. They are that history of they're the ones who did this to my family.
No,
Why would
actually, that I have to take issue with.
Go ahead.
The vast majority of them actually have far more complaints against Egypt than they do against us. Many of them hold Egyptian passports and Egyptian citizenship, but they are not being allowed into Egypt. They have not been allowed into Egypt. They have been kept as refugees, but they're not refugees from here. They're refugees from Egypt.
So where those 700,000 people that we keep hearing about in 48, they weren't kicked out of Egypt, were they? They were kicked out of.
They weren't kicked out of
Demanded,
anywhere.
right? Well, some fled and some were kicked out.
Look, there's refugee camps in Lebanon. There's refugee camps in Syria. There's refugee camps in Jordan. And there's refugee camps in Gaza. There's refugee camps in Jerusalem.
Right.
These people are refugees, not because they necessarily ran away from any place, but because they were denied citizenship. So the people living in Jerusalem, for example, are residents of Jerusalem, and they're refugees, and they're living in the same places that they were living in 1948 and 1967. So why are they refugees?
I think we're talking at cross purposes here. I'm not denying that the case for Palestinian refugees is exaggerated. As you said, it's an exponentially growing number of people. So I'm with you there. I'm talking about in 48, what happened then. That there were documented cases of people fleeing and people being expelled. And
correct.
That part, that history gets passed down from whoever it happened to their descendants.
Let's say,
it happened, right?
I fled. There was a war going on, and I fled, to Lebanon. Many did, and my grandfather fled to Lebanon. My parents grew up in Lebanon. I was born in Lebanon. Why am I still a refugee?
I'm not. Again, we're in agreement there. I think that part is ridiculous. The point I'm trying to make is that from
that trauma that's being handed down is not being caused by the original flight. It's being caused by the fact that I've been kept as a refugee for generations. I've not been allowed to work in certain sectors. I've not been allowed to marry the person of my choice. I've not been allowed freedom of movement. I have no documentation, and I essentially have no citizenship. And all of that is because I am being used as a means of eradicating the Jewish state. Whereas any other refugee, my grandparents were refugees too. My grandparents ended up in the United States. And they worked hard, and they supported their family, and the United States allowed them to apply for and receive citizenship. So they weren't refugees anymore.
Yeah.
And their children weren't refugees, and their grandchildren weren't refugees, and now their great-grandchildren are not refugees. And that is because they weren't being used as a means of eradicating Poland, where they came from. Had the United States wanted to uproot the entire nature and existence of Poland, they would have said, okay, you can stay here for now, but we're not going to give you citizenship, and we're going to keep you and all of your descendants as refugees, limit your rights, limit your freedoms, so that someday we can use you to replace the population that is in Poland.
So I would put a little bit of icing on that cake there, and I would say that just as a general rule, living a life of victimhood is a terrible recipe. It's a recipe for a disastrous life.
Correct.
fully agree that the correct attitude is we were kicked out of, like in what's the name of that movie? Fiddler on the Roof, right? They just, it wasn't that great anyway, and then we just, you get on with the next place that you go into. You make the best of it, right? So
Yeah.
I'm with you there. Let me put it this way. So there's been a military occupation of Judea, Samaria, West Bank, whatever you want to call it, and that has colored the lives of, I don't know how many people, how many Palestinians live in that area. I think it's 2 million or
No one
so.
does. No one
No
has
one.
any idea. There's
Okay.
never been a census. We
Right.
don't even know how many Arabs are living in the areas under Israeli jurisdiction, which is
in,
hysterically
yeah,
funny.
in keeping with the West Bank that sorry, the Wild West that you continue to paint for me.
Correct.
So that feeling, and how could you trust that a confederation or something where Israel, the Jews essentially, can keep security control, knowing what it was like when they had security control, plus it was an occupation, right? How can you accept that? How can you accept that, given everything that's gone on? I mean, how do you get over that mental hurdle? I would suppose.
We have a mental hurdle that, there are people trying to kill us. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not trying to kill you. They really are trying to kill us. And I don't think we're paranoid. I think actually the opposite is true. Israelis have been so eager to believe that peace is right around the corner.
Yeah.
And we will do ridiculous, self-negating, suicidal things, honestly, because we really believe that the other side wants the same things that we do. It's not working. The other side doesn't want the things that we do. Because if they wanted the things that we do, we would have solved this conflict generations ago. If the other side wanted to live in dignity and to raise their children for a better future and to provide for their families and to build something that they can be proud of, they could have done so generations ago. But instead, look at Gaza. They have the highest per capita, they are the highest, the greatest recipients of international support and aid in the world. What have they done with it? They're more interested in killing us than they are in living their lives. Their lives are not what they value. Our deaths are what they value. And so what Israel can do, what Israel has to do, and what we have known and have tried in recent years to forget, what we have known from the day we started this experiment in modern independence, is that we need to have borders and protect them. What we have now is not borders. What we have now is not law. What we have now is some sort of holding pattern that is decaying under us, and it is not helping anyone. It's not helping the Palestinian population living among us, and it's not helping us. It's not helping anyone. It has to change.
Yeah, because I can't imagine. So imagine if you're some American living in an American city, but the rules are completely arcane and unclear to everyone. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what part of the world you'd be in. If the rules aren't clear to everyone, it's going to be chaotic. It's going to be frustrating.
Look, I grew up in America. In America, they taught us good fences make good neighbors.
Right? Yeah.
That is,
But
and they
also,
weren't kidding. Good
you
fences
have to.
make good neighbors, but when you have a bad neighbor, you don't take down the fence. You make it higher.
Right. But also, you have to know the rules of the game that you're playing, right? If and someone has to enforce those rules.
Correct.
This is crazy. It's crazy. Wow.
And when the other side is using those rules to undermine you,
right,
you have to stop. You have to reevaluate.
It's weird. It's interesting that there's, on the one hand, there's this Jewish guilt, which I don't know how far back that goes. That we Jews don't want. They don't want that burden anymore of occupation and just dealing with someone that being put in this impossible situation where you want to respect the other person's dignity and autonomy even, but they want you dead, so you need to put some constraints on their ability to interact with you.
So let me tell you something that
And
most people
that
try.
creates a sense of guilt, right?
Correct. But let me tell you something that most people try to ignore.
Mm,
One thing that we do at Regavim is we have experts in Arabic,
mm,
and they monitor Arabic media and statements by official organs, Palestinian Authority, spokespeople of the major organizations that comprise the Palestinian Authority, Hamas, all of these things, right?
mhm,
We actually provide a lot of the materials for the government itself. So we listen to what they say,
mm.
and we try to believe what they say. When they
Yeah.
say it, we believe that they mean it. And what I can tell you is, we are all, every single Israeli, we are all settlers.
Mhm.
There is no distinction in the Palestinian mind between a person who lives here where I live in Givat Zev over the Green Line, or a person who lives in Tel Aviv, or a person who lives in Ra'anana, or a person who lives in Beit Shemesh.
Yeah.
We're all settlers. There's absolutely no distinction. The distinction, I don't know if it's fair to say, but to a large extent, we ourselves have tried to create that distinction. Israelis have tried to create that distinction in order to try, the peace, quote unquote, peace now movement
Mhm.
tries to convince Israelis that if there were no Jews in Judea and Samaria, we would have no problem anymore. Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Really? How are we doing between 1948 and 1967? How'd
Right.
that work out?
Right.
Not great. Now,
Right.
aside from all of that, all of the communities that were decimated, people were burned alive, raped, beheaded, disemboweled, kidnapped down in southern Israel. They're all settlers, right?
Mm.
This is 1948 Israel, has nothing to do with Judea and Samaria. And don't tell me that Hamas invaded and decimated those communities because I live in Judea and Samaria. Everyone knows that that's ridiculous. They don't claim that. We try to say those things because we're looking for a way to solve the problem. But we're once again, we're bargaining with ourselves, we're negotiating with ourselves, we're creating constructs that the other side is completely not interested in.
Yeah.
Listen to
There,
all of their statements and all of their broadcasts and all of their ideologies and everything else, and read their newspapers and listen to the radio every day. Look at it. Every single Israeli is as much a settler as every shepherd on a hilltop in Yitzhar. Every single one of us are settlers.
I have crazy thoughts, but I would never, ever stand on a podium with a microphone on it that amplifies those crazy thoughts to a crowd of people. I would never. I don't know how fast my parents would disown me if I went on a stage and said, "We must kill every Arab. It doesn't matter where they are, all around the world." This would be grounds for immediate pariah status for myself. And yet, this kind of stuff has happened routinely in Gaza.
Correct.
To me,
Not
this
just in
is
Gaza. It's not just in Gaza. It's in
wow.
Ramallah.
Oh,
Read. Shall I send you translations of Palestinian Authority educational curricula? What they're
please.
teaching children in
Yeah,
Ramallah,
yeah.
right down the block from me here. I mean, I'm as
Hmm.
close to Ramallah as I am to Jerusalem right now.
Hmm.
And the official Palestinian Authority curriculum
Yeah.
talks about the settlers of Yafo, Akko, Ramle, Lod, Ashkelon, Ashdod, all of Little Israel. We are all settlers. We all
Mm.
deserve to die in jihad, right? Every means is acceptable, and it is a religious obligation, not only a national obligation, to kill every Jew. It
So,
doesn't leave me a lot of room for conversation. This
So
is
let
official Palestinian Authority educational curricula. This is how they are raising their children.
so let
So
me let me
that's
let me try to.
number one, clause number one in the Oslo Accords. And I'm
Hmm,
going back to 1995, right?
hmm,
Number one was to end incitement
hmm,
and to publicly and permanently recognize the right of the Jewish state to exist.
yeah.
We haven't progressed past that. Every time we negotiate, we start from the same place on their side,
Hmm.
and they're not moving past that because it's not going to happen.
So let me inject a little bit of optimism into this picture, because both the Palestinian Authority and Hamas in Gaza, they rule by authoritarian means, because they know that the truth is their demise. So they have to control every single piece of information that comes in and out of the place. Because, as you said, right, the educational textbooks of the Palestinian Authority are feeding kids this garbage. Because if they know that better thoughts enter their heads, it's game over. So it's not that Palestinians or anywhere else are incapable of reaching a place where peace can be possible. It's just really a question of improving the informational diet that's going on in the Palestinian society.
So you
How you
recommend
get
that
there?
we re-educate the Palestinians. Look, one of the goals of the stated goals of the state of Israel in this war right now against
Mm-hmm.
Gaza is to de-radicalize Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible. It's not only possible, it's impossible to go and to do anything else.
Yeah.
We the curriculum has to be changed. The Look, when you give an organization like UNRWA, which is staffed by people on the Hamas payroll and maintains that refugeeism in order to replace the state of Israel, when you give UNRWA full control over the education of the children of Gaza, you're putting it right out there. This is
Mm-hmm.
what we're after.
Mm-hmm.
That has to end. That
Yeah.
has to end.
Yeah.
Now, to say, again, as a student of political science,
Mm-hmm.
one of the big problems since Oslo, and I would say even before, is taking the institutions of democracy and grafting them onto a non-democratic society.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we have with the Palestinian Authority, which is why Mahmoud Abbas is now in his, 18th year of his 4-year term. They can't have elections. They know they can't have elections, and even though they blame Israel for not allowing them to have elections, nobody wants them to have elections. The United States doesn't want the Palestinian Authority to run elections. The most recent polls show 85% or more of the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria support the massacre of October 7th and the agenda of Hamas. What are we talking about here? Giving the power to vote for Hamas to a society that has been fed 100 years of hatred and anti-Semitism is not going to get you very far.
Yeah.
So we have to go backwards, saying, "Oh, let's open it up and let's make it democratic." And you can't do that when the people who are in charge of educating, of organizing, of providing any sort of semblance of governance are
Mm-hmm.
people who are completely agenda driven, and that agenda is the annihilation of the state of Israel.
What will it take for Palestinians to say, "My God, all of this has been not only a disaster, but it's just an increasingly counterproductive disaster." We had
I don't know.
in in
I can't
48,
I can't fathom it.
because every at every turn, when they make some kind of change, but they stay on this path of resentment and hatred, just take, for example, Hamas. They take over Gaza, the economy collapses, they turn it into, they're the wardens of this so-called open-air prison, right? Because if they weren't in charge, none of this would have happened. And they take all the resources that were there, and now Gaza is a hellhole. It's completely destroyed. At what point do they wake up and say, enough, that we have to try something else, which is...
I wish I knew. I'll tell you. I was discussing this with someone in the very, very first days of the war. Someone I respect tremendously. And he said there's only one thing that will undermine public support for Hamas. Only one thing. And it's not death, and it's not decimation, it's not destruction, it's not even exile. It's loss of land. If they lose control of the territory, they will lose. That is the only thing that is considered a loss. The United States will not allow that to happen. So whatever happens now, in one aspect, one crucial aspect to the Arab mind, Hamas is never going to lose, because they will maintain control of the territory in one form or another. If the United States tomorrow were to say there are two options, and not just the United States, all the allies, all the, let's call it the civilized world, the Arab countries included, Saudi Arabia, etc., and they know very, very well what the deal is here. The only way for Hamas to be removed from here, to actually lose this war, is for them to lose control of the territory, be it an international force or Israel, or forcing Egypt to retake this territory. And trust me, if Egypt goes back in there, they'll kill them all. They'll do things that Israel would never do. They already have done. Right? They're now clearing out a 4-kilometer wide security zone all along their border, simply plowing under any homes that are in their 4-kilometer security zone. If Israel touched one single structure, you'd have the entire world on its ear, spinning around in circles in two directions, because Israel can't do that. But Egypt can do it. Egypt also flooded many of the tunnels with sewage. It has completely made, in certain areas of Gaza, has made it impossible for people to live, because they have completely polluted the water sources and the ground with soil and whatever, terrible stuff. But the only way that Hamas will actually lose this war is if they lose control of the territory. That's the only thing. And I don't know. It's impossible for me or for you, or pretty much for anyone that we talk to understand how the rank and file of Gaza's citizens, or the Palestinian Authority's Arabs or whatever, haven't risen up against this leadership decades ago. We can't understand it. We certainly would have. If the leadership that was sending my kids off to die were sitting in a hotel in Doha drinking champagne, believe me, I don't know anybody who would go along.
Well, I mean, we're Jews, and we do have a history of what's the term, like going like sheep to the slaughter. So it's not unimaginable.
Different situation. When you're talking about a dispersed non-state actor, it's not the same as having a country and an army and borders and an electoral system. It's a very different situation. Completely.
I agree. I agree it's different, but the thing that they share is that you have two people who are completely oppressed by brutal, murderous psychopaths, essentially. And the Jews just, they hardly ever rose up against the Nazis and their collaborators. And the same is true with Gazans. And They have
The Jews
every
didn't, the
reason.
Jews didn't vote for the Nazis. The Jews
Correct.
didn't vote them in and didn't support their actions.
Hmm.
They were powerless to resist them. But that's
Right.
very, very different than the support and the parties in the streets and handing out sweets and the
Yeah.
participation in the massacre that the Gazans. Now, tell me, how many Gazans at this point have picked up a phone and reported, I know where they're holding hostages. I know where they're holding bodies. I know where there's an entrance to a tunnel. I
Yeah.
know which schools are being occupied at the moment. I know where the control center is. I know which areas we're not allowed to go to because that's where Hamas is. How many
Yeah.
of them have done that? You know how many?
None. Zero.
Zero.
Right.
Zero.
Yeah.
This is
No,
a
it's
completely um, um, there's a term for this in Hebrew, and I'm losing my English at this point, but it's what they call uchlusia meguyeset. Israelis go
yeah.
to reserve duty. The Gazans are all consider themselves soldiers of Hamas
Hmm.
or worse, Palestinian
So
Islamic Jihad, etc. They're part of the war machine.
I spoke with a guy by the name of Ahmed Fouad Al Khatib. I'm releasing the podcast tomorrow, and he grew up in Gaza. He left I think in his teenage years, and he's an American citizen now, but he still has a huge family there, and he is rabidly anti-Hamas, vociferously so, more than you and I think, because he understands just the full scale of the horror show that is their rule. And he says that, contrary to what you read about in these polls about wide scale support for Hamas, he says, look, he's in constant contact with his family there. And what do you think Gazans who are standing in line waiting for international aid, as scarce as it is, in the cold, in the rain, in sharing public toilets, or God knows even what kind of laboratories they're dealing with these days? And do you think that they're saying to themselves, "Oh, hooray for Hamas and look what they've done for us, all the good that they've done for us"? He says that yes, there might still be the hardcore types, but there's quite a few who are very, very upset, and that's just not being captured by, say, the Al Jazeera types who
I've
are
seen some footage. I have
right,
seen some footage.
right.
Um, War's hell. War's nasty.
It's very, very much
Don't
so.
start a war if you don't want to fight it. You know, they started this war. We have no choice. Israel never wanted to fight this war, has tried not to fight this war for such a long time that the war is much worse now because we
Yeah,
tried not to fight this war for such a long time. It has to be fought. There are
but
places in Israel that have been under constant rocket attack for over a decade.
right,
And
which is
my daughter lives in
unacceptable.
Ashkelon.
Hmm.
What can I tell you? You know,
Hmm.
it's ridiculous. It's
Yeah,
ridiculous that a
yeah,
country should be expected to live this way.
yeah. So I don't know. I don't know how this war ends, and I share your skepticism that it'll end in a satisfactory result for the world with the defeat of Hamas, because I think the defeat of Hamas is a good thing for the world. Precisely because, as you say, that Israel is fighting a war that is fighting an enemy that is willing to go far outside the normal rules of war, that Israel's just not willing to go down that road. And you know what? Thank God that Israel isn't going to do all those things.
Yeah.
So it's going to be very, very tough. I want to ask you though, the original reason for this conversation was because I had been reading a lot about, even just now, I see that the Biden administration is going to level sanctions, a second round of sanctions on Israeli settlers for what they claim is to be this surge in violence. And yet I also read online that this is just some concocted story. This is actually not a real thing. So Tell me what's what. Tell me what's actually going on. I mean, are there actual statistics that prove one side or the other? What's the story really?
There are actual statistics.
Okay.
The statistics are infuriating. I'll give you the bottom line.
Yeah.
If you are an Arab, no, let's go the other way around. If you live in a city in the United States of America that is comparable in size to the population of Judea and Samaria, about 500,000 people, you are more than 300 times more likely to be the victim of violence than you are if you're an Arab living in Area C. More than 300 times. Perhaps we should be sanctioning the United States and its citizens because they are violent.
Okay.
Now, I will tell you that in general, the statistics of violence, first of all, start from the beginning. There is violence in every human society on planet Earth. There's also violence in non-human society. There is violence in the world. The animal kingdom knows violence as well. It's of a different magnitude, and it has its own parameters. Every human society has violence. The question isn't whether or not there are incidents of violence. The question is, number one, how does the society relate to those incidents of violence? And number two, how prevalent are they? So let's start with the first one, because how prevalent are they was the heart of your question, but I want to preface it by saying, just think for a second. The state of Israel invests every year hundreds of millions of shekels to work against violence in society on every level. That means starting from education, formal and informal, starting from the preschool age, starting from national programs. You have things called Ir Lelo Alimut, City Without Violence. You have all sorts of youth programs. You have social workers in every community in the entire country dedicated specifically to keeping an eye out and trying to prevent violence. You have there was a massive indictment against the government of Israel because violence in the Arab sector is so much higher than in the Jewish sector. And the Arab sector was complaining that the state of Israel was failing to enforce the law vigorously in Arab society in order to stamp out that violence. So it's all very, very strange, anomalous thing. But Jewish society in general is in Israel is among the least violent that there is. That's number one. When you talk about the situation of violence over the Green Line in Judea and Samaria, directed against Arabs, there are very clear statistics. Unfortunately, for a reason that I'll try to explain, official data was never released. And I think that there's two reasons for it. Only recently, when it's become an issue, has official data been released. But I like to call this the syndrome of the worst enemy of good is perfect. It was very, very difficult for the government of Israel and for the Jewish community leaders in Judea and Samaria to admit that there was violence at all. And there is. Very small percentage, a very small number of actual violent incidents. But it was very embarrassing to admit that there are any at all. So they did not publicize that data. That left an open door for anti-Israel activism, which began years ago and is aimed at undermining, first of all, demonizing the Jewish population of Judea and Samaria. Second of all, creating an association between quote unquote settlers and the IDF in order to cast a cloud of moral turpitude over the IDF itself. This came into full bloom now with the war, but the campaign regarding settler violence began years ago. The European Union and the Rockefeller Foundation and the George Soros's Open Societies and all of these notoriously anti-Israel organizations began funding very specific groups here in Israel and abroad, specifically to create a campaign to address or fabricate a narrative of settler violence. This began years and years ago. In 2015, for the first time, the European Union's annual reports began to dedicate a separate chapter to settler violence. Ever since 2015, these reports have claimed anytime there's a major incident that it is the cause or the excuse for a flare-up of settler violence. So it's everything going back to Guardian of the Walls, Operation Cast Lead, the kidnapping of the 3 teenage boys. Every time something big hits the news, the first thing that you'll see is the European Union releasing statements that according to the data that has been collected on the ground, there's been a surge in settler violence. So the United States government now has a very, very particular pipeline through which it receives its information. And this pipeline has been years in the making.
Okay.
The organizations that provide the data are essentially 2. One is B'Tselem, which receives millions and millions from the European Union, Rockefeller, and George Soros, the New Israel Fund, to create their reports, to generate their reports. And the other is the United Nations OCHA. We call it OCHA over here. It's the organization that monitors human rights in the occupied Palestinian territories. They have a website, which is essentially the main database that collects all the information. And if you look at their website, you click on Palestinian fatalities, and you get this huge number with thousands and thousands of fatalities. It's very, very frightening.
Okay.
When you look at it a little more carefully, and you filter out, first of all, you take 1 year. They're giving you their something like 18 years in one chunk. So you can use their filters, and you filter out, let's say, 2023. Then you use their filters to filter out Gaza and Jerusalem.
Okay.
And that's important, and I'll explain why. And you look only at the West Bank, right? And then you use their filters to limit your search only to things that involved Israeli civilian settlers, not the IDF and not the police, right? You will get, or the total from 1st of January 2023 to 1st of January 2024, you will get a grand total of 9 fatalities, 9 Arabs who died at the hands of Israeli civilian settlers. Very distressing number, but it's certainly not thousands and thousands, which is what they originally claimed. However, read further down on the same page, and it says, the data includes Arabs who were killed while they themselves were perpetrating acts of terrorism against Jews.
Holy shit.
Yes. So that 9 includes Arabs who were attacking, shooting, storming homes, stoning cars, setting people on fire. And when the Israeli civilian who was armed retaliated, protected themselves, acted in self-defense, that's settler violence. Wow. That's what that number 9. Now, how many Arab fatalities were caused by acts of violence that were initiated by Jewish settlers? 0. Even according to them. But when you look at their website, you have to actually read the fine print to understand what they're telling you. Now, why are the numbers so big? For example, if you don't filter out Jerusalem, you get a huge number of violent settler incidents. Why is that? Because every time a non-Muslim goes up to visit the Temple Mount, that is recorded as an act of settler violence.
Wow.
And if you don't use their filters to filter out to only civilian settlers, every time the IDF goes into, let's say, Jenin to arrest a terrorist, that is an act of settler violence.
Wow. Oh my
So
God.
their numbers are very, very problematic. Now let's look at the other side. The two things that I started off with, number one, how does the society relate to the violence? So the Palestinian Authority not only educates to violence, to murder, to terrorism, it also pays people to kill Jews, right? Pay for slay. And it consistently, to this very day, says that it will always continue to do so. This is a major, basic tenet of the Palestinian Authority's entire raison d'etre, to pay people to kill Jews of any kind. That includes children. The more effective you are in killing, the higher payment you get. If you die in the process, your family gets a stipend for life. So that's number one. And number two, the glorification. You go through any Palestinian village, town, wherever, and you'll see all the posters of the quote-unquote martyrs. These are terrorists who were killed in the act. This is glorification of terrorism, and this is education of terrorism and summer camps that train children to be terrorists, etc., etc. So that's the first parameter that I discussed. And then there's the data. There were 5,600 acts of terrorism perpetrated by Arabs against Jews in Judea and Samaria in the first half of 2023 alone.
What are those acts?
5,000. Those acts are shooting, arson, stabbings, car ramming attacks, burning tires, attempted lynches or lynches, right? Dozens of Israelis were killed, dozens. And these are all acts that are initiated by and perpetrated by, of course, Palestinian civilians, since there is nothing else. They don't have another category.
And does this correlate with the casualty numbers that were in OSHA figures?
OSHA doesn't have any figures. No, OSHA doesn't count any of these things. OSHA
No.
counts
The Palestinian
the Israeli
casualties.
so on the same website, you can see Palestinian fatalities, Palestinian casualties, Israeli fatalities, Israeli casualties.
So I'm asking you, those people behind the 5,600 acts of violence.
They don't report 5,600 acts. They report a minuscule number of acts, under 100 actually.
Oh.
The data that I'm referring to is collected by, and it's verified by the Israel Secret Service, by the Shabak and the Israel National Police, and it is actually a tally of only, it's a tally of incidents that is generated by Rescuers Without Borders. All incidents to which they are called out to respond. That means nothing involving IDF soldiers or police, because those are handled by the official, those bodies. Only civilian calls, 5,600 in the first 6 months of 2023 alone. So on the one hand, you have a massive exaggeration of the quantity, quality, severity, and nature of Israeli violence against Arabs, and you have a massive obfuscation, really, of the actual data of the massive rises, and I'm talking about a 300% rise since the outbreak of the war, the massive rise, the surge in violence in Judea and Samaria, but it's exactly the opposite of what is reported to the United States government.
How is that even possible that the most powerful governing body in the world is basing policy decisions on faulty data, such as, especially
They want to.
Well, especially that they have such close security ties with Israel. Surely there's a mechanism between the security services that say, no. Actually, the real figures are here, and these have been vetted. How is this possible?
I'll explain to you. First of all, the United States government never asked Israel for this data. It simply responded to the data that it received from quote-unquote objective sources like the United Nations Organization for Human Rights. right? Now, if you read that website again, the OCHA website, and you read it carefully, and you try to figure out how they're collecting their data, you'll be amazed. What they claim is that these are all attacks or alleged attacks. They don't actually even say that the things they're reporting on the settler violence actually happened. They were simply reported to have happened, and that they are verified by their objective sources. So who are their objective sources? It's really easy to do this. You look on their Who We Are part of their website, and you see the names, and then you Google those names, and you see that they're the exact same people who are on the boards of B'Tselem, Breaking the Silence, FIDH. They're all receiving the information from one another, creating this echo chamber, and they're the ones who are verifying the information that OCHA collects, because they're the ones who supplied the information to begin with.
And so they use this motivation as seeking peace, to say, trust us, we have our hearts in the right place. How could we go?
Do they claim that they're seeking peace? They don't. They claim that they're seeking to protect the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. Now, what this has to do with protecting or, they present it as Israel is violating the human rights of the Palestinians, and therefore it is their obligation to call Israel out on it. Now,
by concocting some data.
They completely concoct the entire narrative.
Oh my God.
And it is outrageous that they can get away with this. I
still don't understand how the Biden administration can continue to do this. Has no one objected to them? I mean, they're in constant dialogue.
I don't know if you've heard, but there's elections coming up.
Really?
Really? And the places that have primaries first, or the places where the president needs help now, have a very particular demographic. Look at that demographic, and you will understand who President Biden is appeasing by sanctioning Israel and Israelis.
Holy shit.
I don't need to say more.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
But do they...
Bad politics, very nasty business, and it's being, the damage won't be short term.
No?
It's a very short-sighted, no, because it's a very short-sighted use. But once you establish this precedent, you can't unestablish it.
Of sanctioning individuals who are...
Correct.
And are these people that...
I'd just like to point out one more thing about these sanctions.
Yeah.
Essentially, what the government of the United States, what the executive order has done is, it's not just about sanctioning individuals or making a statement about the personality of Israelis living in Judea and Samaria. It is a much more dangerous statement about the entire heart of Israel's democratic system. Because the people who are involved here were never charged with a crime. They were never found guilty of a crime. The people who are being sanctioned aren't even Americans. The government of the United States has essentially said, we have no faith in the police or the army or the judiciary of the state of Israel, or of Israel's basic commitment to law and order. So we will be the arbiters on our own territory, on our own standards and our own judgment, without ever bringing these people to trial, without ever accusing them or allowing them to defend themselves.
Wow.
Completely outside of jurisdiction. So the state of Israel essentially has ceased to exist in terms of a democratic government with systems of governance. Because the United States State Department and the executive order essentially says, no, we will decide who these people are. We will decide what they have done. We will decide that they are guilty. And we will decide that the state of Israel isn't punishing them, so we're going to punish them. And we're going to force Israel to punish them and freeze their bank accounts, etc. Or we're going to hold the entire state of Israel and its banking system responsible. Think
Oh my
about the
God.
statement.
Really? That they would sanction the entire Israeli banking system?
That is exactly what they said. Any banks that don't freeze these people's assets will be cut off from the American banking system. Any
Wow.
person, including lawyers who want to defend these people, or any human who decides to donate funds to help support these people whose bank accounts have been frozen, will also be sanctioned by the United States.
Oh
So,
my God.
yeah, no trial, no hearing, no defense, nothing.
Wow. That's like mafia behavior.
Oh, it's a lot worse than mafia. It's essentially turned the entire state of Israel into a vassal state. We no longer can enforce our own laws, pass our own laws, hold people responsible under the law, decide what is legal or illegal. The United States is doing it for us. And what's to stop them tomorrow from doing it to the entire state of Israel?
Wow. And and these are the progressives. My
Yes.
God.
And this is the only democracy in the Middle East. For
That's
some
frightening.
reason, the perpetrators of 5,600 acts of violence against Jews in the first half of 2006 are not being sanctioned by the United States government. They're not being
2006?
denied. In 2023, 5,600 perpetrators of acts of violence, Arabs against Jews. None of them are being sanctioned. None of them are being denied visas. None of them are being held accountable.
How did they come up with these? Who are these people that were sanctioned?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. How'd they come up with this? Joe Biden actually heard about this guy who raises sheep in Samaria? No. Peace Now targeted certain people because one of them actually is a contractor. He owns a contracting company that does a lot of work building Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria. He also is a partner in a farm. So the Biden administration said, we have to seize all of his assets because as a farmer, he is dispossessing Palestinians, violently dispossessing them from their land. Want to prove that?
I thought the whole point was that these people were supposedly violent, doing.
Correct. They're claiming that he, by fencing off areas and not allowing the Arabs to access these parcels of land, he is violent and he is dispossessing Arabs of their property.
Oh my God.
Right. So Peace Now targeted specific people for a reason. It's not just random. This person has never been accused of any act of violence. But Peace Now decided that he's an enemy because he, A, is managing to work the land in Judea and Samaria completely legally. He has permits to do what he's doing.
Wow.
Right? And B, he's also instrumental in helping build those communities that they are targeting. So they pass his name along, and lo and behold, this person out of the clear blue sky has had all of his assets in Israel frozen because the United States government has threatened Bank Leumi, where he has bank accounts, that if they don't freeze his accounts, Bank Leumi will be removed from all business in the United States. That's kind of a big blow for Bank Leumi.
Wow. Are you in touch with this person? Do you know this person?
Nope.
No. Wow.
He's one of them. The others are no different. None of these people are criminals. None of these people have ever been accused of doing anything against the law.
Wow. And oh my gosh.
I would just point out, if you have a minute, read the executive order.
Okay.
Read the language. It doesn't say anything about settlers, by the way.
Hmm.
It doesn't say, it could be anyone, meaning anyone that the United States of America decides is a destabilizing force or does not, or is an impediment to the two-state solution can be sanctioned.
Right.
Now, I have some news for you. Every single Jew in the land of Israel is an impediment. Every single one of us is a destabilizing force, because if we weren't here, there'd be stability, right? There would be no Arab-Israel conflict if there were no Jews here. So every single one of us, without any trial, any accusation, any defense, any conversation whatsoever, tomorrow can be sanctioned by the United States government and the entire state of Israel, because the state of Israel is what's causing the Arab-Israel conflict.
Yeah. So this is one thing that I just has been very irritating to me to watch American foreign policy in the region, is to look for any kind of coherence. I think making sense is too much to ask at this point. So I mean, but coherence would be good, just as a baseline. But none of that really makes.
Nope.
There's been none of that. It's been scattershot. It's
Correct.
been contradictory.
Correct.
You know,
President Biden started out by saying we have Israel's back and Israel has to do this and Hamas has to be eradicated. And now, I didn't really say
right.
it, I didn't really mean it, I didn't really,
It's over the top, all that kind of stuff. And I think you're
and
right.
nobody knows what he's going to say tomorrow. Could be anything.
But I think that you're absolutely right in pointing towards the elections, because Biden is polling pretty poorly against Trump.
Yeah.
And let's face it, it's going to be Trump and Biden.
Yeah.
And the war in Israel is hurting Biden, I suppose, with his constituency.
He's choosing to let it hurt him. I firmly believe, and I think that it doesn't need proving, that the vast majority of Americans support Israel's efforts, support Israel as a democracy, support Israel's right to exist. That is a traditional, although there has been change in that, and there have been very worrying trends among the younger generation.
Mm-hmm.
The mass of voters in the United States would probably be far more inclined to vote for a second term for President Biden if he weren't behaving in this way. So
Right.
he's getting advice from somebody, some very particular directions that he thinks he can capitalize on anti-Israel activity and anti-Jewish activity, and that's unfortunate.
So that's when I started to think, okay, those people have a lot at stake, and they're not dumb. And so if they believe what you say, that most Americans are pro-Israel, and the polling data shows this, and they're certainly anti-Hamas, then something else must be at play here. Because if the rationale is supporting Israel strongly is good for my re-election campaign, then something else must be explaining this sudden tilt in the other direction. And I'm wondering if that's...
He's talking out of two sides of his mouth. He's saying, I have a place in my heart for Israel, and I will always support Israel, and I will Israel and Israel and Israel. But he's saying both things.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's banking on Americans only hearing what they want to hear, filtering out the things that don't fit in with their worldview, or if he's saying, it's a classic Arab technique, but they do it in two different languages. In English, they say one thing to the, on the mic, and in Arabic, they say something else. I think, he's doing things that will appeal.
The problem is Americans speak English.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, I wonder. That bears, I think, more investigation as to what all that is about, because that's wild. I mean, they are railroading individuals for no provable reason.
Well, they're railroading the entire state of Israel also to
Correct,
demand that
exactly.
Israel defend its actions and give a deadline of 45 days or whatever it was for Israel to explain its actions in Judea and Samaria when it's collecting, going in to arrest wanted murderers and terrorists and members of Hamas. Who said he won? Exactly. Really?
Exactly. And it's not clear that it's going to help him in the elections against Trump.
Yeah. I think, the disadvantage to having stocked his entire administration with advisors who are Obama regime retreads
Mm.
is coming back to bite him in a very sensitive place right now. Because he's
So
hearing,
that's
he's inside an echo chamber and he's hearing these things from people who their position on all of this was well known beforehand. We
where
knew what was coming when we saw who the appointments were, when we saw who was, getting these key positions.
yeah.
It didn't surprise us that it's now come home to roost.
So that's where I start to think maybe his age is a disadvantage in the sense that he's in the room with these people and they're feeding him bullshit takes on the day to say take this position because it's going to help you against Trump. And those people, like I think, what was it there? Robert Malley, he was some sort of paid Iranian agent, or that was the allegation.
Yes.
And there's some intelligence
I don't think
operation.
it's an allegation anymore. I think it's actually been proven, but
It's been
don't
proven.
quote me
Okay,
on that. I think
so there you go, and you have people who are paid to say and twist the story in such a way, and they're using these horrible tactics again this against the Israeli bank, but also it's just these poor people who had, on the face of it, nothing to do with whatever they're being accused of.
correct.
This is crazy. This is American policy.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. It's
Oh
crazy.
my God. So what happens now? What do you think happens between now and the election for us?
Sorry.
And it's a broad question, but
Well, there are sometimes there comes a time in the life of a nation, like it started a speech.
yeah,
We are engaged in a war for our survival.
yeah,
People in America, I think, have very, very limited ability to understand what that means.
mm,
There's never been a war on American soil. There's never been an invasion. It's very different. I mean, the last of my kids just got out today. He was drafted on October 8th. He's been in Gaza for 4 months. They just got out today. He's a father of 3. He has 3 small children at home. My son-in-law just came here. He just was 3.5 months in Gaza. Got out, has been sitting every day trying to complete the first semester that he missed of university so that he can not have to withdraw from his degree. And he starts his second semester on Friday. It's an insane situation. We have families who have been uprooted from their homes. We have thousands and thousands of refugees within the country. They are not able to go home. My daughter's going back to her house in Ashkelon today.
wow.
It's insane. People in America can't fathom what's going on here.
I read that the economy contracted almost 20% in the fourth quarter.
Correct. And we
Yeah,
don't complain, and we do what we have to do. But there's no difference between today and 1948 in terms of the dangers that we are facing. We are in a multi-front war against enemies that have been preparing for years to kill us, and that's what they're
yeah,
trying to do. Israel doesn't have a choice, really.
yeah,
And I think most Israelis, politics aside, most Israelis have had a rude awakening to a lot of things. Truths that we tried not to face for a very long time, things that we thought were part of the past, for better or for worse. Israel has come together in a way that I haven't seen in a very, very long time in terms of resolve. We understand at this point that we have no allies. And that's a very sobering thought. We have no allies. We have to do this. It's to be or not to be time. It really is. Other things that we've come to understand are that our hands have been tied by our allies in a lot of ways in terms of self-sufficiency during the war, in terms of our ability to arm ourselves, to protect ourselves, to make our decisions for ourselves. That has to change, and it's going to change. Doesn't matter what happens politically for a while now. All of those things, I think, have seeped in or reawakened in the Israeli mind in a way that we've allowed to kind of.
Yeah. And for an American context, it is depressing or sad to see this retreat of American power and American influence in the world.
Yes.
They were. It makes me very sad as someone that lived most of my life in America.
Yeah.
To.
I will tell you one thing, though. Again, as a student of political science, the
Mhm.
United States has not always been what it is, what it has been in your memory and mine. I'm
Mm.
obviously much older than you are, but even in my memory, not so long ago, the United States said, superpower is not for us.
Hmm.
We, there was a sort of a separationist kind of mentality. The United States did not get involved. The United States wasn't a member of the League of Nations. The Republicans actually voted against it. Said
Hmm.
we will not will not take responsibility for fighting the wars of foreign countries, and B, we will not have other countries tell us what we have to do, when we have to do it, and for whom. We
Yeah.
will protect our own interests, and that's it. So it's not like the end of the Roman Empire where everything is crumbling necessarily. It is that the United States at a certain point has to regroup also and say, okay, what is our national interest? What is it that why are we here, and what is it that is important for us to protect, and what lengths are we willing to go to protect it? If other countries aren't willing to protect themselves, are we going to do it for them? How much of the global, Cold War kind of mentality is still appropriate?
Mm.
How important is it to us that the Soviet bloc, for example, the former Soviet Union or Russia or whatever you want to call it now, doesn't expand and doesn't return to its former size? How important is that to us, really? What are we, there's a time where countries have to reassess
I
and
think
things have
though
to
that in a world that has several countries that are armed with nuclear weapons, it's not a choice that America can just recede from the world and say, "Good luck to the rest of you guys. Good luck fending off the Russians and the autocrats and the Chinese."
I
We're,
agree
we're
with you
we're
completely,
past
which
that.
is why America making believe that it doesn't need a strong democratic ally in the Middle East
Yeah,
is a really stupid policy decision.
yeah.
America, I try to tell people this and they look at me like I'm an idiot. America needs Israel. Um, we're a very, very small country, but we live in a very, very important neighborhood, and we
Hmm.
have capabilities that the United States really needs in terms
Yeah.
of our technology, in terms of our ability, intelligence,
Hmm.
information sharing, all of these things. Turning your back on Israel is not such a smart idea right now.
Yeah.
If America wants to maintain some sort of handle in a nuclear world.
Well, this was, you said that there are many people in this country, or just Jews around the world, that had their entire worlds blown up on October 7th, and I count myself as one of them. That was, in retrospect, living in a very sophisticated delusion about what our enemies actually believe and think. And as I said to you, right, to get up on stage with the microphone and start saying kill all the Jews, not just in Israel but all around the world, and then sort of be applauded for that. To actually understand that I had to have taken that seriously the first time that I came across something like that, and not just think of it as like some sort of political stunt.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that these realizations that we have to really have a sober look at everything, all the people around us, and to not hesitate to say that if our closest allies, the Americans, don't take that seriously, then we have full right to say, okay, well then this is the picture, and there's no more wool over our eyes. We're going to continue. We're going to do what we have to do in order to survive, right? Because, and this is the other thing that's been blown up in my mind, is that there's no reason anymore for Israelis or Jews to have to justify themselves and say why should this state exist? This state exists because it's a force for tremendous good in the world. And if you don't see that by now, that's on you. That's your problem,
You never
not
will.
ours.
That's correct. I think the part of the realization, part of that light bulb moment that's happening now, I think the light's going on in stages for Israelis, is it doesn't, Ben Gurion said so many of these things so long ago. It doesn't matter anymore what the
Goyim say.
Goyim say. It matters what the Jews do.
Right.
And we have no choice. We have to do it. So you condemn, you can this, you can what are we going to do? They're not going to like us no matter what we do. So we may as well protect ourselves. And don't expect them to do anything else. We don't expect it anymore.
There's still, though, a romantic side of me that thinks that can't be the world. Really, to go around and thinking that every person that isn't a Jew is some sort of enemy in the matrix in the making. That one day they'll come and stab you in the back.
I don't believe that either.
Okay,
I do believe we have a lot of friends. I do believe that I do believe, and I don't think we have any choice, that truth, justice will prevail. We have to believe that.
For sure.
We have to make sure and continue to check ourselves all the time that we are on the side of truth and of justice.
Yeah.
And stick with that, because we don't have anything else. There are a lot of people out there who they want to be on that side, and they want to help that truth shine forth. And I still believe that, and I welcome any of them who do. And we try to provide, we at Regavim try to provide the ammunition for that fight, and that is truth, facts, data, analysis that makes sense. We try not to get, we don't deal in narrative, we don't deal in prophecy, it's not a religious thing. We're talking about the rule of law and international justice, historical justice, and that's the only way we can move forward. So we welcome anybody who wants to join in that crusade.
Well, I say kudos to you guys. That's great work, and I'm happy that we had this conversation. Again, I learned so many things that I didn't know before, and it's worse than I thought. But
I'm a bummer.
No. But as you were saying, right, the truth, and I'd rather know what the hell is actually going on, rather than read some politically motivated and tinged narrative.
So I would invite you or anyone who's listening to look at Regavim's website. We put up all of our research. Again, all the things about the illegal construction, land use policy. We have a whole section on environmental issues. We have all sorts of things that arise from the question of who's using the land and for what purposes, and all sorts of policy analysis, policy papers that form the basis very, very often for government action. So whatever data we collect is available to the public on our website at all times.
Okay. Cool. Naomi, thank you so much for doing this.
Pleasure.
And
good luck
feel better.
to all of us.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Alrighty.
Okay.
Take care. Bye.